Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Corona Daily Q&A with I'm ER Dr. Larry Burchett, and I'm joined today by investigative journalist Natalie Brunell. Natalie, thanks for chatting today.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. I know you've been a little under the weather. Haven't we all gone through our little sniffles and coughs and wondered if we have corona, all of us? What are we
Yeah.
going to talk about today?
I mean, I can't believe that we're already a month into this lockdown, and obviously, what else is there to talk about but this virus? And you're right. I don't know if I had it. I got tested recently because I've been sick twice now at the start of 2020. Took the test and it came out negative. But a lot of people questioning, did I at some point have this? Because whether it was the flu season that was super severe or just some other viral infection going around, I know myself and a lot of people have never been as sick as they were at the beginning of this year due to something.
How was that for you?
It was tough. It was definitely, I mean, I don't know if you ever experienced since you're sort of around a healthcare environment all the time and exposed to lots of different things, you probably have a really strong immunity. For me, I get sick once a year, generally around fall or early spring.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually get like a bronchitis and it's pretty mild and I recover in a couple of days. But this, whatever I had earlier this year, hit me so hard that it's to this day, I still have a cough lingering. It was a battle for a while. I had to take
Mm-hmm.
some time off of work because it really put me out. And again, I tested negative, but at the same time, I tested more than 2 weeks after my symptoms really began. So who knows? It's not a fun way to start your year.
No, it's not. I'm sorry that you've been sick so much. That sucks. And I
Yeah.
hear you kind of wondering. It sounds like you're saying, look, this is out of the ordinary for me. Could Corona explain this? Yeah, maybe. Boy, I want that antibody test so bad. Like for
So do I.
you, for your own peace of mind. Oh, I did have it.
Yeah.
That's what was wrong. And then now going forward, you could be like, okay, I've cleared it. I'm immune. I'm better. I don't have as much to worry about. I think you could make an argument that somebody like you could re-enter society. I want
Yeah.
that antibody test so bad. Stanford, help us.
I do too. Well, this is one of the things I think would be interesting to talk to you about because of your experience in the medical world. I feel like right now you can go online and find evidence to support any theory, right? It's been floating around for many months and some of us have already had it, or no, there's specific ancestral data to pinpoint it to one specific person and it didn't exist before,
Yeah.
mid-February. So, what have you seen and what are the studies that, have caught your attention and what do you think about all of the theories surrounding when this actually spread in the United States?
You're asking me a lot of questions at once. Um,
Well,
let me start. So, I haven't seen a lot of this. So I work at several different hospitals throughout California. There's a lot of rural. There's one in particular where there have been some cases, and I'm suspicious. I can think of cases where I was like, that there was that 70-year-old lady that was smoking. This is before this was really even on our radar, and I bent in, I listened to her lungs. She was pretty sick, admitted her to the hospital, and I remember looking at her X-ray and going, "Oh, that's kind of a bizarre, atypical pneumonia." You know, just based on the appearance of the X-ray, I didn't think anything of it at the time.
and this was
Looking, what?
what month?
I think that was February. It was
Okay.
like late February. It was before lockdown. It was way before we ever had a test. And
Yeah.
and so looking back now, I'm like, and there have been cases that have trickled. But I was like, could have been, but you don't know. And the only way you would know now is to do an antibody test. But even still, that's not 100% sure that at that time that was it. So the places that I'm working, I mean, I feel like a little bit of a fraud, like I've got my little, oh, here's my daily Q&A on Corona, and let me tell you my experience. And I go to work and it's empty. Like our volume is down 40%, 30 and 40%. I had
Wow.
a day when I was in the ER when I saw 4 patients during the day, which I've never had that in my whole career.
Wow.
And people come in and they want the corona test. We talk about it. We talk about when it's appropriate. Sometimes there's a 24-hour test. You call public health. You know, one hospital, there's another one that takes about a week and whatever. We figure out what the right thing is for the patient. But I haven't seen a ton of it. And part of it is what I want to kind of discuss with you a little bit. A day or two ago, I saw this graph of the expected peaks of coronavirus in each state. And you look at New York, and New York goes like this, you know, April
Wow.
9th peak or whatever. And then a few days later, they have the California one. California one, it's so flat, like this. I mean,
Yeah.
California has flattened the curve. It looks like, maybe, but it looks nothing like New York. And that, like with what I'm always like going back and forth between what I read in the media and then what I'm seeing with my own eyes
Hmm.
on the front lines.
Hmm.
And I'm like, that's what a lot of us are seeing. I watched that it's not very much in California. It's more in L.A. than San Francisco. But San Francisco has had. I watched this Grand Rounds at UCSF, and it's been relatively flat. Their whole hospital's not full of. They have cases. There are intubated patients in the ICU, but it is nothing like what we would have expected for San Francisco. I would have thought, gosh, all the homeless, you know, all
Hmm.
of the Chinese, all of the travel to and from Asia, San Francisco, I would have thought would have blown up. And it didn't. And so that's a very interesting, why did New York, why didn't California? I think one of the big reasons is California, especially San Francisco, London Breed, give that mayor credit. She said, yo, we're devoting resources to this. This is emergency. She led that even before Gavin Newsom. It was a great job. I think that saved lives. That's a big part. There's this question, and I want you to talk about this for a little bit. There's this question of, does California have some immunity to this? Like, have we been exposed earlier from corona? Not just as like the first case in December or January, but like, could this thing have been floating around since the fall? Does that explain why California has some immunity to it? New York does not. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm super curious about that as well because obviously, travel is one of the things that's blamed for the spread, and we definitely have a ton of traffic and travel between California, our big cities here, and Asia, where this all started. So I question that as well. I feel like we're very fortunate that we didn't have the situation that happened in Italy and is happening right now in New York. Um, and if we're getting there, then hopefully our hospitals are becoming more prepared. I know that, Newsom ordered a ton of PPE because we didn't necessarily have enough. But hopefully you're right. I mean, I've been listening to the press conferences every single day from the Department of Public Health here in LA County, and they're saying it appears that we are flattening the curve and that we've been doing with social distancing are working. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. How do we reopen? They've extended it now to May 15th, which is more than a month out. Do we get an antibody test to be able to go out? And I've read some really conflicting things about the antibody test because there was one article I read that showed that older people showed more antibodies than younger people. And in some cases, people who had it who were on the younger side didn't even appear to have any antibodies show up in the test at all. So why is that? And would that, I mean, could they disappear? And I don't know how that works. Do antibodies not stay for a long time in our systems? I mean, a lot of questions, but I am really thankful for what you mentioned, the fact that leaders in this state stepped up and made sure that we locked down way before other cities across the country. We didn't have the beach situation that happened in Miami. I mean,
Right.
only those images. And we also, I think, have the advantage of just having more of that suburban feel to Los Angeles. People are naturally more spread apart. We spend more time
Yeah.
alone in our cars as opposed to everyone commuting, using public transit in cities like New York and in New Jersey. Everyone's sort of on top of each other and really interacting more so, I would say, in physical proximity than we are here. So maybe that helped too.
I totally agree. I mean, certainly the population density in New York is just so much more than San Francisco or LA.
Yeah.
Talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was saying even on lockdown, subways are still open in New York. Like, it's hard. People get around. Like, the culture there is public transportation or a cab or an
Yeah.
Uber. And so these become these little, persistent vectors for that to continue, even among, stay at home quarantines. Um, I worked at, I want to talk about Santa Clara for just a second. I worked at Santa Clara Valley Hospital, kind of just south of Silicon Valley, basically it's like San Jose's county hospital.
Hmm.
And when I worked there, it was only for a period of months. I used the translator phone more than I've ever used it at any hospital ever. Santa Clara, I think, more than LA or San Francisco, is such a that San Jose airport is such a travel hub for Asia. It's really an international port, um, and just kind of I just keep going back to thinking, like, how did this thing not blow up more
Yeah.
there? You know,
Yeah.
um,
I
because
think
even in those situations, there's families and a lot of people living together and all of that stuff. And I think the leadership in this state deserves a lot of credit.
I think what's been really fascinating to see play out, because I never, to be honest with you, before this, I never even thought about the threat of a pandemic. Before this, I know that there's a ton of documentaries and series that have covered this exact threat and gone back to the 1918 Spanish flu and talked about how we really need to be prepared. And it never hit my radar until now. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is that first patient that was diagnosed, and I believe it was in Washington State, right?
Right.
Just to, at that time, just to meet the criteria in order to be able to get one of these COVID-19 tests. Now, I think for sure that could not have been the first person in the United States who had coronavirus. There had to have been other people, and that makes me wonder at what point it was floating around. And you could probably speak more to this, but obviously viruses mutate. So was there maybe a less serious strain going around that we developed immunity for, or that was proliferating in communities and now is much more serious, and we're seeing sort of this other mutation of it? And those are my big questions, and I think the only way we could get answers is if more people get tested and we do get the antibody tests. And I would love to be able to know if I had it or not, or if
Yeah.
or
You
I
ask
could.
you ask so many questions. I can see, like, you just have all your mind is like, I want to
I
know
know.
all of the answers to this.
No, and I'm not necessarily saying you have the answers, but those are the things I think about. And I wonder how I can report on them, because now I'm mostly at home,
Yeah.
especially because I was sick for a while. So I was sort of quarantined and locked down. But it's, we have to be really careful as journalists going out now, and you're very limited in who you can talk to. And honestly, the hospitals have not been very forthcoming. A lot of them hide behind HIPAA, which protects individual rights, but it's not supposed to protect all the hospitals from giving out information like how many beds do we have, how much PPE do we have, how many people do we have who are experiencing the
Yeah.
virus. Or, I mean, that's something that would be beneficial for the public to know, to better understand the virus. And sometimes the hospitals are not willing to give out that information, which is frustrating.
Oh, this has been an interesting time of censorship, especially, I mean, not only of, journalists like yourself, but even doctors and nurses that work at hospitals getting shut down frequently,
Have you
especially
experienced that?
what?
Have you experienced that? Not being able
Personally?
to talk about like what's really going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I was told to keep quiet.
And what's the incentive? Like
I
what's
think
driving?
I think a hospital doesn't want to be associated. They don't want the bad PR of being the bad PPE hospital. And the truth is, the places that I've worked, I haven't felt a shortage. I mean, here in California, like, we haven't had the surge. It hasn't been a real thing like, Italy, or a lot of doctors and nurses calling for in New York. That kind of it hasn't even been that.
Thank
But it's a
God, yeah.
very sensitive time, and um, I have watched administration reactions to this stuff, and I appreciate it a little more. I can see it from their perspective, which is a fear of, God, what if we do run out of this stuff? And then hospitals are competing and having to pay high price to have PPE, And I think there are reasonable things that we can do to not burn through this stuff. I talked about this before on Ben Gleib's show. I week ago, so I got all hot. I was so pissed off. I was like, this is same thing as everybody else, which is there's this tenuous relationship between those of us that care for patients, especially on the front line, and the MBAs who are making the bottom line decision about profit in the system at the expense of us and our patients. And that's a chronic thing that is a nerve, man. And this stuff that PPE hit that nerve, and I got all hot about it too. And I was like, like it goes there. You get
Yeah.
really, because it threatens your own life, and it just seems very cold and callous that they don't care. That said, I went to work, and we had one patient that came in to room 3 and was isolated, and was PUI, patient under investigation, rule out COVID. They came in for the test, so we put them in the room. They get a mask. We do the whole thing: N95 mask, some kind of eye protection, and the yellow gown and gloves. And I watched you burn through that stuff really fast. Now we can reuse the gowns on the same patient. So, but imagine all the people that go in there. You've got a registration person that gets their information. You've got at least one nurse, one doctor, the lab tech that draws their blood. I ordered an x-ray to look for pneumonia. That's 5. This is
Yeah.
just, and all of a sudden we've gone through 5 sets of
Yeah.
equipment. This patient wasn't admitted. Imagine if they're admitted to the ICU. Sometimes you've got 4 doctors, several nurses, a respiratory therapist, on and on and on and on. Like, you can see how you can burn through this stuff
Yeah.
really fast, and this becomes a problem. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, I appreciate this problem a little more. What are solutions where we can keep us safe, where that's like non-negotiable? Like, we cannot feel like we're just being thrown into battle without a shield. But then also conserve this stuff. And so one thing that a nurse that I was working with, she worked at Kaiser, and she said, normally when we're giving IV medications, the pump is right by the patient's bedside. So the nurse goes into the room, hangs the antibiotic, attaches it to the pump, and then leaves, and the pump pushes it through through the tubing into the IV. And so what they've done is they've just lengthened that tubing. And so the IV pump is outside the room now. So the nurse doesn't have to go into the room anymore. He or she can put that, attach the medication to the pump, and then it'll pump all the way in there. The nurse stays protected, still get the medication. You're not burning through the PPE as much. Now, you can see how then there's another problem with that. The patient is so isolated. You know, there's rules where families can't even come into the ER waiting room.
Yeah.
And where this gets really sad is people die alone. Now, we're with
Yeah.
them, and I've been with enough people that have died in the moment to be with somebody and to comfort them and to
God, I can't imagine.
get them through that so that, they can know it's going to be okay. But, God, and I know we don't want to expose families and stuff, but I'm like, man, when it gets like that, maybe we should be putting the family member in all the garb and getting them at the bedside just to comfort somebody in that time. Anyway, my point is you can see how medicine evolves in this very sterile COVID whatever time, but we still want to try to bridge that and be human.
Oh my gosh, those are the most sad stories that I've been seeing, especially on the East Coast with regards to this, is the people who they have to say goodbye either via FaceTime or they don't say goodbye at all. They don't see their families one last time. They die alone.
It's awful.
I know someone whose grandfather was in New York. He was one of the people who passed away, and she can't just get on a plane and fly and do a proper funeral. And it's just, I can't believe that we're living this. I can't. It's so sad. It's so horrible. And when you see those caskets, did you see the video? I think it was released yesterday where there's an island in New York, and they're burying the unclaimed bodies, and it's just this mass burial site. I mean, I never imagined seeing that in my lifetime. It's just so tragic.
It's incredible. And the doctor, the doctor in me, there's loss to begin with. The family, there's this goodbye and not being able to do that. But the better that you can say goodbye, have the funeral, go through these processes that are millennia old for grieving is what it is. You don't do that. And this is it's a there's a lot there's so much trauma to this for the survivors, you know. And so it's one more thing that we're going to have to work through now and then when this thing is all said and done, but that's rough.
I
That's
know.
just rough.
Well, going back to the PPE gear that you were talking about, something that it was really interesting to me. I filed a report this past week about the fact that California used to have a stockpile specifically for an emergency like a pandemic. And I don't know if this story hit your radar at all, but back in 2006, under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, he basically allocated more than $200 million to create a stockpile of N95 masks, ventilators, equipment,
Arnie,
hospitals.
way to go.
Um, yeah, which kind of makes sense when you think about him because he's just, he's this real life action hero and he wants to be prepared. He doesn't want us reacting. He wants us to be ready before something happens. And so at the time, there was the threat of avian flu. And so they stockpiled all this stuff. And then when Governor Brown took office, he was facing a $26 billion deficit. And it would have only cost about $6 million to maintain this stockpile, because it costs money to lease warehouses for the space, for the equipment and for refrigeration, things like that. It would have only cost $6 million in like a $129 billion budget, but he cut that. That was one of the things that was just done away with in the budget. And I spoke to one of the medical consultants at the time who worked for the state, for the Department of Public Health. And he was like, no, we're going to need this. This is a mistake. And so some of the equipment, fortunately, stayed in the state in the form of being donated or purchased by local health departments, including LA. I think we received more than 200 ventilators. But the rest eventually got discarded or has since expired. And it just makes me think, oh my gosh, what if we had that? And fortunately, California has been in a position where we are not in such dire straits as New York City. But I mean, imagine if we had that now and we didn't have this worry of, do we have enough equipment? And every hospital felt like at least, it wouldn't have gotten us through the whole entire pandemic, but just to bridge that gap is what the person I interviewed was saying, is that would have given us that breath of air to say, we've got this for now. And hopefully going forward, we do something like that again and build it back up because it's clearly smart to have it.
That's a really interesting story that you found there with that. I remember those budget times and Jerry Brown doing that, and I can't believe he turned it around and generated a surplus. And I'm sure it's always difficult to cut stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, moving forward, sure, I don't know that they would ever cut stuff like that again.
Yeah. Well, and then when you think about it too, this is the stuff that we'll need once that big earthquake hits. And hopefully today people I certainly am thinking more about what do I have at home? And if things were to be shut down, whether it's a pandemic or an earthquake or something else, I really do need to have things in my home that would allow me to not necessarily have to leave for a couple of days and make do. But it's been crazy seeing this whole scramble around the world. And with the media landscape that we live in now, where, online, like I said before, you can find a theory for everything. And you can find sort of information that leads you down a rabbit hole and makes you think this is the end of the world. And then other places you find these either stories of hope, which I think are really great, or you just find the people that are like, it's not as bad as it could have been, and we will get through this and we will get out of it. And it's just been interesting. It's been an interesting experience.
I want to get more of your thoughts on media stuff, but just a second ago you talked about how now you said you're kind of looking around and you're thinking more of, this. It made me think how this has impacted you, and so I'm curious, how has this whole thing changed you, your personal life? What are you going to stock up on? Are you going to have a permanent toilet paper stock now, like at home? But then also professionally as a journalist, like how has this whole everything impacted how you will do your job going forward?
Well, on a personal level, it was interesting to see at the very beginning that immediate rush and those store shelves, remember the images where everything was empty, everything was completely gone, and we thought that everything was going to shut down, including places like grocery stores.
Yeah.
And that whole experience of, an official kind of lockdown or quarantine where there are still essential businesses, and having that reassurance that no, the food supply is still going to be maintained. And so you don't need to rush out and panic. So I think that was an interesting experience, right? Because at first I definitely, stocked everything that didn't need to be refrigerated or cooked for a while.
What are some things that you have a ton of?
Oh, so I have this massive bag of rice. Like I never even make rice on my
You're
own.
the person that keeps taking my rice from me. I can't find rice at the grocery store.
Rice, tortillas and beans and canned food, canned tomato sauce, pasta, all the things that, you don't need too much to put together. And I definitely was not one of the people that hoarded toilet paper, but I did get a lot of paper towels and I don't know, and water, because I go through water like crazy. Even though I know that you're supposed to be, you can drink from the faucet, but I do like San Pellegrino too much to just drink from the faucet. So, but yeah, and then on a professional level, gosh, it's just been so interesting seeing how to do these reports remotely, because I'm a video journalist. So normally I go out and shoot video and put it together in edit. And if I can't leave my house, what am I supposed to use as the visuals? So it's been both relying on things that, other people have shot and sort of the file footage that exists online or that we have access to.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you can believe it, I've been asking the people that I interview to have the people in their life around them shoot video of themselves, and I give them a mini tutorial on how to frame it and what to shoot. And then they've been sending that to me, and we put it together that way. So yeah. That's been fascinating. And I really hope that when this is all said and done, I hope that things kind of go back to the old way, because there's so much that you've missed by not actually being able to go somewhere and be somewhere in person with them. And, but it definitely just will make me more cognizant and aware of things. And we're going to be reporting on this for the rest of the year. There's going to be businesses that can't reopen. There's going to be definitely a hit on our economy in a way that I think none of us really are prepared for yet. And I don't say that because I'm a negative person. I just think that, a continued lockdown that persists this long, and the thought that, the second that the floodgates open, things are not going to go back to normal. They're not immediately, we're not just going to everyone be jumping on planes and going to our favorite bars. I walk by on the sidewalk, and people, even though I'm wearing a mask, people will, run around 20 feet around me just in case, so that they're not too close to me. I think that's crazy. I think, how did we get to this spot? Wow, that's amazing. So I don't think things are just going to go back to normal, and it's going to be interesting to see what we report on as our country hopefully reopens.
Mm-hmm. I as you're talking about all that, especially the professional stuff, I'm just sitting here and I'm like, man, I bet she can't wait to get that antibody test that shows that she's immune, and then you can take your camera and just run around looking at stories and shooting film and all that stuff.
If you believe it, I shoot most of my things now on iPhone, because these cameras are so good, and people
what
are.
What phone do you have?
So I have the iPhone 11 Max.
Is it really good?
Yeah, the footage on this is beautiful, and it has 3 lenses, so I can shoot like kind of close up, regular, and then kind of a, what do you call it? The fisheye. Looks a little bit wide, ultra wide. Yeah. So I shoot a lot of things on this, which a lot of people are surprised to hear. But again, the camera's really good. And I think people are so used to being around phones and talking into their phones and talking into their devices that it's it's disarming, because people are so used to it.
Do you go vertical or do you go wide?
Always horizontal, because you don't watch your TV like this. You watch your TV like this.
Well, but a lot of people consume even video content now, like when you look at Instagram and these things, and they are vertical.
That's interesting that you say that because there's this trick, and I'm not sophisticated enough with editing to know how to do it. But there are news networks and video platforms now that will start a video vertically so that you start it on your phone the way that you normally talk or type on your phone,
Hmm.
and then it lets you know turn your phone
I saw
horizontal,
that.
and it flips it, and then the video changes, and you watch
Fancy.
it the way it's kind of meant to be watched. So I think that's really cool. But I did buy myself a selfie stick just about a week ago, thinking if I'm going to get out in the field soon, I at least could put this on the selfie stick and hold it 6 feet away
So
and
I'm
hold.
gonna tell you something even better than a selfie stick is you need a gimbal.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I'll tell you more about this off camera. But I when I went to Barcelona and Croatia, I did a. I'll show you my little Instagram thing. It's incredible. It makes it look like you are a cinematographer. It's so smooth.
Oh,
You can move back and forth. Selfie stick is just like you, and it'll jumble around, and the video quality isn't so good. But this gimbal has all these balancing mechanisms in it. It's incredible, and it's like $100. It's like $150.
so, because you just mentioned two amazing European cities, I have a question for you. Based on what you've seen on the front lines and being in the hospitals and seeing this virus up close with people dealing with it, do you think we'll be in a place, maybe towards the end of summer where people can, take those vacations that they were hoping for to Europe? Can they go to Italy? Or is this something that is probably still going to be affecting us all those months later?
God, I'm skeptical. I have no idea when we're gonna open travel up. When you look, some countries are putting travel bans against the United States now. Asia doesn't want us, right? If you look at Singapore,
My work phone.
should I don't want to keep you. Should you get it? Um, have a conversation with work. If you,
Well, unknown caller. I don't know who's calling me. Hold on one second. Can we
ooh,
pause?
let's get that on.
Hold on.
Mm. Um, yeah. So,
Okay.
oh, you're back.
It wasn't important.
Oh, okay. I think we're all wondering who called you
That's my
on your
work.
work phone.
Well, especially on a weekend, I'm like, what happened? Because then a journalist always lives with this semi-panic mode marinating in the background. Like, did some massive thing just happen? And we always have our phones on and on loud if possible at night just in case, because you really never know.
You don't
Like,
want to miss the big story.
right, and news changes by the second with these alerts. So, but we're good. We're good.
Damn, damn Lois Lane. Um, so to answer your question, when are we going to be able to freely travel again? Um, I'm worried it might be longer than I think a lot of us have in our minds. A
Me
lot
too.
of people, when they heard May 15th, LA is going to be on lockdown, that was too much. It was a month.
Yeah.
And we keep getting, and I was like, this needs to be in 2 week increments. It just needs to be 2 weeks at a time, and we have to watch the data and the cases and see people can handle 2 weeks at a time. When they heard a month, I think a lot of people were overwhelmed, and that was too
Yeah.
much. So I would back up to 2 weeks at a time, personally, from a policy standpoint. But nobody can predict this. But this is my concern: is you look at some of these Asian countries now that did so well, Singapore, South Korea, and Singapore. Some of them have had increased cases. There was Singapore. There was a lot of breakouts in these dormitories of migrant workers, which are just breeding grounds with all people close together, and like that makes sense. That's been the only source of their local spread. But a lot of the cases that they have are from international travel. So people coming in from the outside. Now we're a reservoir, the United States.
Yeah.
Shut that down. And so looking at it like, here's countries who have done better than most because they were more prepared, testing and so forth, and all these apps and all that stuff. They've done well with cases and deaths. And they're seeing numbers, go up, and travel is a big reason, if not number one. So it's like, well, when are we going to be able to travel again? I feel like that's going to be one of the last things to open up. It's like we'll have our peak, which a lot of places looks like it'll be in April. Cases will peak, things will lag, that stuff will go down. We'll have some comfort. I think it'll be a stepwise process.
Yeah.
People who can demonstrate immunity can go back, the more essential to the less essential,
Sure.
whatever that means. We're not going to do it all at once. Big sporting event and football games and whatever, that's going to be one of the last things that we do. I have no idea when that's going to happen. And same thing, travel is going to be one of the last ones for exactly that reason, is that is one of the main ways that this thing, from an airplane, from just the first thing Trump did was no travel from Asia, close the border. And that was probably a good thing. So
Hmm.
like, it makes me think, God, that's going to be one of the last things that we open. And just like sitting and looking, like all this stuff is like 2 weeks at a time, da 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 da. But I'm like, God, is there any way that June, July will be traveling?
No,
I'm
I'm so sad about it too.
sorry to
I
say, but I don't think
planned
so.
in June, and obviously for a lot of people, I know girls that had weddings. The wedding, I don't know if you heard about this fiasco. It's huge for women. Obviously, I know
The
maybe
wedding,
the
you mean?
gentlemen don't care as much about the weddings as much as the brides do. But yeah, so many cancellations, and now it's like, well, how do you even reschedule it? And some places are not able to give back money, and
That
I,
sucks.
yeah, it does suck. But
Men all
speaking,
over the world are like, it's cool, babe. We get married later. We don't have to get married right now. We'll keep doing what we're doing.
but it's interesting you talk about like the tapering of openings, because I saw something online this week about Austria. I think the plan going forward is as of May 1st, it's like these types of businesses, and then the hair salons are next, and then 2 weeks after that, it's bars and restaurants, and
Yeah.
so it's interesting how they're doing it, and it would be interesting to think that if we all had some sort of easy access to a test that says you're immune and you're good, or you don't have it, you can move freely about. And but I wonder, will restaurants now limit capacities? Will they change their sort of setup with their restaurant seats and their tables? And it makes me so sad, because I know people in the restaurant industry, it's one of the toughest industries in general, just
Yeah.
in terms of how much you're putting out and spending just to get a little bit back, and now to be shut down for months, and the thought of people after this being too scared to go, it's like I can't imagine how many places will close, and it makes me so sad.
Yeah. Totally.
What do you miss most about normal life?
Um, Seeing my daughter.
Oh, you haven't
That's
been able
hard.
to.
What?
You haven't been able to because you're so exposed as a healthcare worker.
Um, yeah, I can't. Uh, between the last thing I want to do is
Yeah.
get her infected. She would probably be fine, but then she gets her mother infected and
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. I don't want to go into too many details about that, but then I can't go home to Kansas City to see my dad or sister. Um, that's been I think I really want to see my daughter. I feel
Yeah.
like I need to, for other reasons that I don't want to get into. Like I really want to go home to Kansas City,
Yeah.
and I can't. Like I think a lot of healthcare workers. I've heard of a lot of doctors and even those who live with their spouses and kids, like have been isolating in the garage, and um, it is isolating. Now, a nice thing about it is I still get to go out to work. Like I've got a letter that says I'm an essential worker. If I was ever pulled around or questioned, it's like here's my letter. No, I'm like
Yeah.
legitimately doing my thing. And at work, I get to be social with the coworker people I work with and patients, and so that part is I'm glad that I'm not like locked in my house and losing my
Yeah.
mind. But
Oh, I think people are getting to that point of being stir crazy, and just feeling like I mean, really, you're right. That May 15th extension, I think it was a slap in the face for a lot of people. Like,
it's
wow,
too
I
much.
don't know if I can do another. It's not even, it's more than a month.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and when you talk about Kansas City, I really relate to that too, because my whole family, I'm the only one on the West Coast. My whole family is in the Midwest. And it's funny how the roles have kind of reversed, because I've been having to tell my parents, like, don't go out, like, stop it, just take this seriously and stop going out. And I'm all of a sudden turning into what my mom was when I was a teenager. But I just worry about them. My parents live with my grandma, who obviously she's in her 90s. So I worry so much that somehow they could get it if they go to the grocery store. And
Yeah.
I'm no longer, to be completely honest, I'm no longer worried about myself. A, because I've been sick and I feel like on some level I had it.
Yeah.
But B, it has been so long. And now when I do go to the grocery store, everyone's staying so far away from each other and everything's hosed down with disinfectant after everybody takes a cart or whatever, that I feel like now this is probably the cleanest any place in our city has ever been. So I feel almost like maybe a false sense of security in that. But
I think
yeah.
you're gonna be fine, and I think a lot of us share that worry about our parents. My grandma's 92 or 3. She's like ready to die at any second. She's totally fearless and is like ready to go see my grandfather. But we're like, Gramps, you don't need to go like this. You're still in pretty good shape, and we want you around. Like, and she's staying at home and being smart and doing fine. I talked to her the other day, and she's talking with people, and she's fine, but we're worried about her in the city.
I think about my grandma a lot lately, just because it's easy to get down on ourselves, and be like, oh, this is so horrible. I can't go to my favorite bar. I can't, go to the park and go to Runyon. I can't go to the beach. My grandma survived World War II. It's like, this is cake. Like, oh, I just have to sit home and watch Netflix. We have to remember how lucky we are that this isn't, for most people, for the majority of people, this is not so much worse. And we're not in a state of, runs on grocery stores and unable to get supplies. And I think that that's what we need to remember in some of these moments, because and our lives look different. They're not so Instagram worthy nowadays, but at the same time, this probably is some good perspective for a lot of people. And this is not as bad as people in history have had it with lots of different things,
I think you're right. It's good to put it into perspective. Okay, I've got a question for you as a journalist, as an investigative journalist. A lot of people have told me now, a lot of people have always said that they just can't watch the news because it makes them feel anxious and afraid, and they get all worked up, like when we're watching the primetime television news, for example. And now, between what's on TV and then what they're seeing in the written stuff, it just makes people crazy. And a lot of people are like, I just can't do it. I want to stay informed, but I just can't do that. How do you see, the current media coverage? Media is such a broad word. Television journalism.
Yeah.
The New York Times print, stuff like that. And what would you tell somebody as a journalist who wants to stay informed, but like doesn't want to go crazy getting caught up in all of that?
Well, I mean, I think that everyone has their own preference of how they like to get their information. I teach at USC, and most of my students, even if they do want to go into broadcast, what they mean by broadcast now is the internet, and digital video. And so some people just prefer to get, just quick headlines and go on Twitter. Maybe because of the way I grew up, I was always attracted to TV, and I still watch a ton of TV news because I immigrated to the United States from Poland when I was very little, and my parents, to augment their English, we had the news on all the time. We watched a lot of news, and I grew up on Barbara Walters and all these big news programs. And so for me, it's kind of ingrained, and I know what it takes to put together a story, and I know how the sausage is made. So I have a deep respect for news media in general. There are, of course, bad apples in every industry, and now we live in a world of commentators and opinion makers that aren't necessarily journalists. But for me, I think it's based on your preference. The reason I love video is because you can read an article and get information out, but it's when you see a person and you see how the way that they talk and you see their environment, it's a completely different experience of immersion and feeling for that individual or story or relating to it, connecting to it. I'll just, for example, you could have read an article about Joe Exotic and Tiger King, but seeing that character and seeing him portrayed in his natural environment is completely different. And there's something so magnetic about it. And I've just
Mm-hmm.
loved the videography and the cinematography that video provides. So for me, that's the way I prefer to get news and create news. I want to see who's talking to me. I don't just want to see the words on the page. I want to understand the people behind it. And to be honest, it's one of the reasons why I chose to work at Spectrum, because we're so different. We tell stories in a very different way, and we're very character driven. And, the standard news format of just like the talking head or like the soundbite with the wallpaper video, that's really easily, replaced by anything else. And the man on the street, we call it MOS in journalism, where you just ask Joe Schmo at the gas station what he thinks.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really journalism. It's an easy way to put together a video on a short time frame.
Mm-hmm.
But I like it when you can invest a little bit more time and you can find the right voices and make someone really feel a human experience. And that's what we really strive for at the network that I work at. So that's fulfilling to me. And so again, like, I get why people don't want to watch, especially certain types of news media. And I get the whole criticism of if it bleeds, it leads. But
if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, that's the saying. If it bleeds, it leads. Like all hard news at the front, it gets front loaded. But you know what? That's actually, people can criticize it, but the problem is that when news networks in the past have tried to put just the happy and the fluffy stories first, no one watches and they turn away. But
that's where you're stuck. Yeah, they're addicted to it too. Like, that's what we want to watch.
Yeah, there's some voyeur.
If it bleeds, it leads. That is going to be the title of this thing.
But yeah, no, I find the media landscape fascinating, especially as it evolves, but it's just ingrained in me, and it has been for a long time, and I want to work in it and make it better. And I take each of my stories and interviews very, very seriously, in the sense that I feel like I hold a great amount of responsibility, and I want to have integrity, and I want people to trust me. So for me, I don't know, maybe I'm just very old school about it. Big J, the way news used to be, but I really have a great respect for my industry, and I will defend it.
Barbara Walters, what generation do you identify in?
Well, technically I'm a millennial, but I grew up, again, I feel like I grew up differently from most of my American peers, just because my parents were in their 30s and early 40s when they moved. So I had to grow up, I think, very quickly, because we were just, in a new country. I was learning a new language. And I have a really big age gap between my brother and I. Mm-hmm. And brother is now in his early 40s. I'm in my early 30s. And I always wanted to be like him, and I always wanted to be around him. And I wanted to listen to his music, watch his movies. And so I feel like I'm almost a 70s kid rather than an 80s kid in some way. But really, I grew up on all the old school journalists and old school movies. And so I don't know. I guess I'm a millennial that identifies a little bit older.
I mean, like, millennials get their news and through this, right? Yeah. But you're telling me that that's a little more Generation X-y, maybe your brother, or your story of, and then how you kind of got onto TV. That's interesting.
I still watch TV news. In fact, when I used to be at ABC News, that was my job before Spectrum, I used to watch the different network broadcasts. I would have them taped or on demand, and watch all of them every night. I would watch nightly news, CBS Evening News, and World News Tonight, and compare. And I wanted to know the differences and which one covered what and how. Yeah. I have, if I could have trading cards, people have trading cards for players.
You're a TV news geek. Oh, that's great.
So that's half the people I've interviewed for my podcast are, news journalists. But I guess I find journalists fascinating too, because I find like I have so much in common with them. Everyone that I've met is super curious, wants to know a little about a lot of different things. And our job is different every single day. We don't go to the same place like a regular office job. And so, yeah, it's a great industry, I think.
One thing that I've seen one thing we've had success with is to kind of talk about what you were saying about being able to tell a story with
Hmm.
video, and you get a much better sense than reading print, for example, that has pictures, or when the news just tells some story with some B-roll.
Hmm.
Is when I do these things with somebody like you and experts, number one, the interview where we can have a conversation, but two, the long form where you
Hmm.
have more time to get into it. I mean, I can tell you how many times I've gone on KTVU and San Francisco Fox, and I've had 3 to 4 minutes to talk about some huge thing that's directed by, a great anchor, but there's only those are just talking points. You
Yeah.
can't really open it up. And so having interviews like this with somebody like you where we've got the time, sit down, get into it a little bit, now we know you've got a ton of rice at your house and various other, um, people have said that they feel like they get a much better sense of, putting Corona, for example, in context when we can give a bunch of examples and talk about, oh, we've we're on lockdown for another month. Are we going to be able to travel? Da, da, da. It just gives you a much better sense of here, and it communicates things are going to be okay. Let's not freak out. We're getting through this. It's been interesting for me to observe that in the audience that watches this stuff and kind of gets back to me and what they appreciate and how that's different. These nuanced differences in communications is what it is.
Oh, I totally feel you. It's one of the reasons why I started a podcast. And in fact, in episode 1, I talked about how my job, I spend 8 hours every single day to create a 90-second story. And you can imagine that I have so many wonderful interactions with people and I see wonderful things and it gets boiled down to just like snippets and seconds. And that's, it's a good way to tell, the basic facts, the biggest points, boil it down to the information people need on the go because people's attention spans are short. But I love long conversations. I love long interviews. I love documentaries. And I love really getting into it and learning and peeling away the layers. So that's why something like this is really great because especially now that people can kind of find the content that they want based on their interests and curiosities, you can really get to that deeper level that, a time limit doesn't really
Yeah.
fall with.
Oh, I mean, that's just a great example to hear you say you spend 8 hours for a minute and a half, and it's just like, what didn't make it? What's all the interesting
Yeah,
stuff that's on the editing floor that still
yeah,
is newsworthy, but you've
sure.
got your little box that
Yeah.
you just have that limitation. um, from your journalist perspective, what do you talk to me a minute about how you see government response and the CDC and all. We talked for a little bit about hospitals not being very forthcoming, just not wanting to deal with media. How's the government been, do you think?
Um, well, that's tough too because I feel like we didn't get all the information right up front that maybe we should have. And this is the first time I'm dealing with a pandemic in my lifetime. So I don't know what the specific rules were when it came to when the CDC finds out about something or the World Health Organization recognizes as something being a threat. How, the dominoes are supposed to sort of fall. Like, when are we supposed to be notified? Who gets notified when? When does the tests get put out?
Yeah.
It's been a learning experience for sure. I think that we're going to learn sort of in retrospect, in hindsight, seeing how this unfolded and what we could do for next time, because for so many of us, this is really uncharted. I do appreciate that we've had experts like Dr. Fauci to listen to. And again, I love listening to a longer interview with him as opposed to just a couple of sound bites. I'd love to do, a sit down with him that's like 60 minutes to really pick his brain,
Oh my
as well as some
God.
people that have been studying this in the virology labs. I don't know. I
I
wish
would
that.
recommend. He did a sit down with Sanjay Gupta that was about 25 or 30 minutes. It's great. Check that one out.
Okay, I'll check that out for sure. I always think that we need more information, right? I mean, if we have the information, we can take action. So if we knew that there was a virus that was circulating or that, or there was a way to get testing earlier, of course our response would have been better and we can learn from it now. I wish I wonder what, certain agencies knew. I think that's one of the reasons why everyone was so fascinated with that movie Contagion. And one of my colleagues actually interviewed the screenwriter because it was this, just to see the behind the scenes that we don't get to see of what happens, like what's initiated when there's all of a sudden a pandemic that is potentially forming. How do they analyze the genome of the virus? Who do they notify, and who gets sent out, and how do they track down patient zero, and all of that's like, I wish that we had all of that information. I wish that we had exactly that. I don't know if you saw the movie, but there's a part where one of the CDC officials, the scientist, is showing like the virus and how it's mutated, and it has this really cool imagery on a computer that I don't know if that stuff exists or not, but it's like, I'd be fascinated to see something like that. And we get a couple press conferences with basic information. To me, the message has always been the same: social distance, stay at home, take this seriously, here are the new numbers. But it would be great if we had more transparency from all those agencies.
I haven't seen Contagion, but last night I watched the one with Dustin Hoffman and Morgan
Oh,
Freeman.
right.
Outbreak.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so good. And like, it's one thing to watch it on a movie, and that story makes it so egregious, where the government is going to bomb and wipe out 2,600 people in a small town to try to prevent that disease from getting out to the rest of the country. So that one's like so obviously wrong, but I'm seeing shit with my own eyes where I'm like, is that really happening? Like, are doctors really being muzzled? Like, is the government really doing, it's like I'm naively not, I'm just like, no, this wouldn't happen today. And it's like, bro, like, it wasn't that long ago that Nazi Germany did some awful,
Yeah.
awful things. Like, why would I assume that government and power and all this stuff is somehow different in present day, especially when the things I'm looking around and seeing, I'm like, that's really sketchy. Like, this is,
Yeah.
are we in that, to what degree are we in that kind of a dystopia? I think you always have to ask that question.
Well, and this goes to something you said earlier. I have found people on Twitter that say something like they're a healthcare worker and they do not have enough gear, and they feel like they're soldiers going in without, weapons. And I have reached out to them and said, "Will you talk to me?" And immediately there's just, I can't speak out. I'm afraid that I'll lose my job.
Yeah,
There's
that you'll get fired.
that's so sad to me, that the people who are on the front lines can't be honest, and we can't raise awareness so that on a greater scale we can fix some of these problems, but the hospitals are too worried about, PR.
Bad
And
press.
so frustrating and so sad to me. And so I have encountered that, and some people saying we need more respirators or this or that. And then they tell me ultimately I have to run it by the communications office, and then I get shut down or I don't get a response. And it's been frustrating. It's been really frustrating.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And I don't want to get fired either,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially now. Unfortunately, I'm not independently wealthy and I can't just, say whatever I want, but
Yeah. No, it's a crazy time. And it's a really big learning experience, I think, for sure.
hey, this has been
I
really
wish
good. What else were you going to
people
say?
that I just wish that more people that actually were experiencing the virus, actually, I wish we could get more of those stories out there too. But obviously we always want to maintain patient privacy, and we don't ever want to interview someone that feels uncomfortable. But some of the most compelling stories that I have seen are those family stories of this person they didn't have underlying health conditions, or they were a worker and now they're out of a job and they work for a massive corporation that has millions of dollars, and like, why, this isn't fair. Those stories, I
Yeah.
think they should be out there, and I wish that people were willing to talk to us or reach out to us more, because it is very hard to, with HIPAA, just try to find someone who's battling this virus or a family member and get those stories. But they're important. They're really important to tell and to see who's being impacted and what it means.
It's a tough dilemma. I think there's a lot of um, I think people could get a much greater sense if they just followed one of us around. But that
Mhm.
is so impossible to make happen between all of the people that you'd have to get to sign off on that from a hospital to an individual patient. And then it also kind of, at least from my perspective as a doctor, it's like I'm here to take care of people.
Mhm.
Inserting this desire to tell a story or educate or whatever sometimes becomes a conflict of interest with, wait a
Sure.
minute, are you really here to help me, or are you trying to exploit me in
Sure.
this for press? So
Sure.
it's a delicate thing.
But
But I
two of the most compelling video stories I've seen, and maybe you've seen at least one of them, was a BBC reporter who went into one of the ground zero hospitals in northern Italy and showed what it was like. Because I think at that point, the world didn't really take this seriously until we saw a lot of those hospital images and
yeah.
ICU images from northern Italy. And so he went, he was completely, he looked like he was in this hazmat suit from head to toe. And he interviewed the doctors on the front lines and went to the ICU beds and the emergency rooms and saw how overloaded that hospital was. And that was just shocking. The images played on every single American network. And then last week, a really great correspondent who I interviewed on my podcast before. He's the senior national correspondent for CBS News. His name is David Begnaud. He did something similar in I believe it was a hospital in Queens, New York, and very similar, suited up, and really just saw the front lines, experience what it was like. And at one point, it was fascinating to me. One of the nurses there, they were wearing garbage bags. They didn't have enough equipment, so they had MacGyvered garbage bags to protect themselves. And one of the nurses said, "I wish I could have your mask," because CBS News gave him this massive, mask and respirator
mm,
that he stayed safe. And she's like, "I wish I could have something like that. I don't feel safe."
mm-hmm,
And he ended up giving her his mask and
mm-hmm,
was like, "You need this. You guys need this, and we need to know that you need this."
mm-hmm.
And the story was just, it was fascinating. I mean, seeing it with your own eyes, again, going back to the power of video, it makes you realize that what this looks like and what it means to deal with it.
I think you bring up a good point, which is how the video can communicate the reality that then everybody can take seriously in this country to do social distancing and understand what we're trying to prevent. There's a flip side of it too, which is what's happening in Italy and New York right now could happen in some places of the United States, but there's also places where it isn't happening. And so it's putting that in the context of, like, for me, just seeing so many people that are so freaked out by all of this, I'm like, hey, we're not in the middle of New York City right now. I know you've got those images in your mind. Calm that down. That's what we're trying to prevent. It isn't going to be like that everywhere. It's just not, because of a lot of factors about New York that make it an unfortunate breeding ground for this thing. But we certainly want to take this serious. So that kind of balance. I feel like I hear this criticism where people are like, you know, I'm seeing all that stuff in New York, and I look around and it ain't like that here. And there's this disconnect between, and so it feels like there's an element of exploitation there. It's got to be balanced, like
Yeah.
what are we doing with those images and all of that at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly surprised that there are still states and cities where there are no lockdowns or safer at home orders. And that's so surprising to me, but obviously they haven't been impacted.
It's gonna be bad. There's gonna be a lot of places that are gonna suffer, for sure. I mean, I can't. This stuff is all unfolding right in front of us, and then there will be years of analysis. There will be
Yeah.
chapters upon chapters, just thousands of books written on this thing and documentaries, and we'll make sense of all of it. I can't
Um,
wait to like get good science and
yeah.
good analysis of all of this.
I wanted to ask you about something before we start to wrap up. Um, there have been some really interesting studies that show that the virus attacks hemoglobin. Is that how you pronounce it? Hemoglobin?
Hemoglobin.
And that's what actually it starves the patient of oxygen, because that's what I guess transports oxygen within your blood. And so that's why some of the drugs that we've been hearing about in the press conferences and Donald Trump has been talking about them have worked. I think it's the anti-malaria drug,
Right.
what's that called?
Hydroxychloroquine.
Yes, that. What have you seen any of those studies? What do you think about them? I mean, obviously it's still very, very early, but I think in a way it's kind of hopeful if they can figure out exactly what the virus is attacking so that they could try to, prevent that, as opposed to just assuming that your lungs are now just taking the brunt of this and it's a respiratory illness 100%. It seems like it has more to do with blood oxygen saturation levels. Have you heard anything about that?
I have read about that. So the initial thought was that coronavirus attacked lung cells and led to a form of
Mm-hmm.
lung or respiratory failure we call ARDS, acute
Yep.
respiratory distress syndrome, which is basically low oxygen,
Mm-hmm.
something that looks like pneumonia, but it's not bacterial pneumonia. It's this form of lung failure. It's actually very common. We have ways to maximize the treatment. There's no real specific antibiotic or anything for it. So we started basically treating corona respiratory failure, COVID, or COVID SARS, SARS-2, whatever, like ARDS. And then people are kind of, ICU doctors, they're making observations where they're like, this doesn't seem like ARDS. It's a little bit different. Could it work a different way instead of the virus causing problems at the level of the lung cell, the pneumocyte? Maybe it actually affects the red blood cells' ability to carry oxygen. And it's like, well, if hydroxychloroquine works, chloroquine was a malaria medicine. Hydroxychloroquine is kind of I think about rheumatoid arthritis or autoimmune conditions, but they're related meds. If these medications kind of change certain things within the cell, the acidity of the lysosome, whatever the mechanism of that is, and they're saying, well, if that works, maybe that gives more credence to why really the problem could be with the red blood cells' ability to carry oxygen
Right.
between heme and iron. You kind of
Yeah.
get into the physiology of how oxygen is carrying. Um, that's a huge distinction to make because drugs work different in different places, and um, I think that's very interesting. And it's not what we originally thought. I am sure we will continue to learn more and more, and the more that we unpack that and figure out, oh yeah, no, it is in the lung, or no, it is in the red blood cell,
Yeah.
then you have medicines that target that differently with potential treatments. And um, big picture wise, these are all just maybes. You know,
Mhm.
um, you look at HIV in the 80s, it took years, couple years to even get it, figure out what it was.
Yeah.
And then, to get a diagnosis and then to have a test, that didn't take like 6 weeks or a couple months. That took years. The first treatment wasn't until 11 years that we had AZT, the first treatment. So we're way faster now with technology and tools and everything that we have. But still, even this kind of a theory, okay, it's a great theory. Let's put it to test. That's going to take time.
Yeah.
So maybe, and unfortunately, the same thing is true at this point, and I've listened to too many lectures on this from legitimate academic doctors. Is there any treatment? Does anything work? Maybe something works or not. Do we have any proof? Do we have good proof that anything works? No, we don't.
Yeah.
Like, not zero, like a little better than zero, but like good medicine is so tested and reliable, and I'm going to use a strong word here, true. People say evidence-based, whatever, like it's the truth. Like antibiotics treat bacterial pneumonia. We've done millions upon millions of people and studied in that, and we just don't know. It's so early. So no, we don't know if anything. We don't know if
Yeah.
hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin work. Vitamin C, I'm skeptical of that. Um,
I
there,
have taken so many vitamin C gummies. Holy moly.
I think it's fine to take a little bit. Don't overdose on vitamin C. The last thing we need is like a pandemic of kidney failure from people taking thousands of milligrams of vitamin C to essentially treat anxiety. I mean, let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
It's really not a great treatment for much. It's a squirt gun.
No, for
Low
sure.
doses, it's fine. But so we don't know. It's all unproven is the word. It's a bunch of maybes. I'm not
Mm.
saying no, just saying maybe. There was a study that came out in the New England Journal, I think yesterday, that looked at a group for this new antiretroviral medication, the compassionate use one.
Mm-hmm.
And the study was like, well, we gave it to a bunch of people and a whole bunch of them got better. And I'm like, okay, what about the people you compared it to, the controls? Well, it wasn't a controlled
Right.
study. That's just a cohort. They just look at it. And so you don't know. You don't know
Right.
if they would have gotten better on their own. You also don't know if you gave them that medication and you killed off some of them that would have survived otherwise. Like, you can't forget that. So whatever, I can go on and on and on about that.
Nope.
Hydroxychloroquine, I think, is let me say one other point that I think is very relevant. What are you smiling about?
I do think it's interesting. Again, you could go in many different directions because that's why we have personalized medicine today, right? One person's body's going to react one way, another's going to react a different way. One day we have a study that says coffee's good, the next day it's causing cancer. I mean, it's going to take years to really sort all this stuff out.
That's true that people have individual responses. That's true. But there is good and better evidence that applies to everybody. Don't undermine that. That's a real thing. Sure, if you want to take a little vitamin C, you feel better, great, knock yourself out. But let me say this. This is a really important point about hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine can potentially, for some people, cause their heart to have a irregular heartbeat, okay? And there is a very real question. So it's unproven. Maybe it helps people who are sick with corona. Maybe it doesn't. We really don't know. We're doing studies, which I think is appropriate. It could potentially, like we were talking about, affect the red blood cell, whatever. Does the study show that it helps or not? A good study. But 20% or so of people that die of coronavirus have heart failure, have where the virus attacks their heart, causes damage to heart cells, whatever that mechanism is. Hydroxychloroquine can potentially, like we talked about, be cardiotoxic. Are we killing people by giving them hydroxychloroquine? So not only is the question, does that medication work? Does it help people clear the virus, not die, not get on an intubator, not get on a ventilator? But are we giving a medicine that, especially for people who are having heart complications,
Yeah.
are they dying from that thing? How do
No,
we know?
it's because I'm sure this is the hardest part about being in medicine right now, confronting this, is a lot of it probably feels like a big experiment.
It is. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
Which is exciting because it's like, great, now we get to figure it out. And what we're doing now, in 6 months, it will look very different as we get more information. But it's also difficult to be working in that and to be treating someone and explaining to their loved one, look, we really don't know. This is the best thing we're doing right now, but we don't know. That's the truth.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. We are so appreciative.
You're welcome. Let's talk more when I've actually taken care of a lot of these patients. I feel a little bit like a phony. There's people who are doing more.
The LA Surge Hospital, so I look forward to hearing about your experience there. I might be covering that this week as well. So, and we'll watch the curve. I mean, hopefully this has been some good news in the last couple of weeks on the LA side, at least Southern California. It seems like things won't get as bad as they were in New York, and we're all so blessed for that.
Very hopeful. Hey, thanks for doing this. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
You're a great guest.
Thank you. You're a great interviewer.
Oh, well, coming from you, that's quite a compliment. I appreciate that.
Barbara Walters would be proud.
Oh, wow. Stay safe. I hope you can get an antibody test soon and get out there and continue doing good journalism. We need that in the world, especially in corona times.
For sure. Thank you.
All right. Where can people find you? Do you want people to find you on socials and stuff?
Yeah, social media. So at Natalie Brunell on Instagram, at Nat Brunell on Twitter, and I have a podcast called Career Stories, and you can watch my reports on Channel 1 if you have Spectrum Cable, Spectrum News.
Great. Thank you for coming on the show. These are available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Corona Daily Q&A with ER Dr. Larry Burchett. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.